I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today we try to work out where we are after mixed messaging leaves the world confused over whether or not President Zelensky plans to use the upcoming 4th anniversary of the full-scale invasion to announce presidential elections or a referendum on a possible peace deal. Russia continues to rage at the Starlink switch-off, a comms catastrophe exacerbated by the Kremlin's clampdown on the Telegraph messaging app, and the Olympic controversy continues over the Ukrainian helmet of memory. And later, we get the latest from our resident Russia watcher, James Kilner.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Wednesday, the 11th of February, 3 years and 354 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Adélie Pojzman-Pontay, and Russia expert James Kilner. I started with the latest military updates. So last night, Ukrainian drones hit Russia's Volgograd oil refinery. This local media reporting this. That's the former Stalingrad city, about 300 km east of Ukraine. Volgograd Oblast Governor Andrei Bosharov said that some damage was reported at the site, adding that an apartment building and a kindergarten were damaged with no casualties. He said emergency services and municipal authorities are conducting search and rescue operations to locate and dispose of possible drone debris. Now, if confirmed, that's the first time this year that particular oil refinery has been hit. But on January the 10th, a drone attack did hit an oil facility about 100 k's further southwest. Russia's defense ministry had earlier claimed, this is yesterday as in earlier, claimed that it had shot down 48 Ukrainian drones across several regions of the country, but didn't say that any were over Volgograd Oblast itself. Now then, into Ukraine, and about an hour and a half before we started recording today, explosions were reported in Ukraine's western city of Lviv, amid reports of Russia having launched hypersonic Kinzhal missiles. Now, reporters from the Kyiv Independent on the ground in the city at the time reported hearing 2 explosions around 2:50 p.m. local time in Lviv. Ukraine's Air Force had earlier reported missiles heading towards the city. Lviv Mayor Andrei Sadovy said that air defence operations were active. At the time of recording, I've not seen any reports of casualties. However, last night, 4 people were killed in Kyiv, that's about 50 k's northwest of Kharkiv city. Of the 4, 3 were toddlers, 2 one-year-old boys and a 2-year-old girl. The 4th victim was a 34-year-old man. We're also told that a 35-year-old pregnant woman and a 74-year-old woman were also injured in the attack. Now, I think behind the headlines, behind those numbers, we can conclude that Russia has just ripped apart another young family. Now, at least 11,000 people are without electricity in Zaporizhia after a drone strike last night. Zaporizhia Oblast Governor Ivan Fedorov said that windows were blown out in several residential buildings in the city amid a Russian drone attack that started from around 11 o'clock last night, local time. No injuries were reported, but worth noting the temperature in Zaporizhia last night was minus 9 degrees Celsius. That's 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Across the country, 129 drones fired by Russia, of which 112 were brought down. Now, there's some very alarming footage from Ukraine's I Want to Live project that shows Russian soldiers being targeted by their own side as they're trying to surrender. So you may remember the I Want to Live project is run by the Coordination Headquarters on the Treatment of Prisoners of War, supported by Ukraine's Ministry of Defence and Defence Intelligence of Ukraine. It's an organisation set up to facilitate the safe passage into captivity for Russian soldiers who want to surrender. Anyway, this footage is supposedly taken in the vicinity of Chasiv Yar. We see 2 Russians who've laid down their arms and are walking forward to surrender. They're about 20 metres apart as they're walking along. Then on the way, a drone appears from behind them, from the direction of Russian forces, and flies into the guy at the back, killing him. The other one starts running and is met by Ukrainians who bring him safely into captivity. Now, Russian soldiers and the meal blogging community have continued their collective meltdown over the Starlink switch-off. I'd point you to military historian and researcher Chris O on X that says there have been further instances of price gouging with the cost of US-made Ubiquiti Wi-Fi bridges that have been illegally imported into Russia doubling overnight. One mill blogger called Strong Word complains Elon is certainly a real jerk, but we have some real assholes in the rear who decided to ride the wave and make money off their own soldiers. Wi-Fi bridges instantly doubled in price. It's maddening. Some are spilling blood and others are making a living off it. Now, scammers are said to be targeting soldiers with false promises that for a fee they can get Starlink working again. Another mill blogger called Callsign Ozetin warns, I'll write this again, comrades. Remember this, don't trust anyone who offers to restore your Starlinks by any means necessary. Others in the community warn that Ukraine is obtaining positional data from the Starlinks in Russian hands, even the ones that have been switched off. One mill blogger says, attention everyone, urgently, immediately disconnect all Starlink satellite stations from power and remove them from open skies. Positioning data from inactive devices is being collected. And another says, according to unconfirmed reports, all data from the dishes is now integrated with Ukrainian data systems Delta and Nettle. In other words, the enemy is verifying data by position. There is also widespread scepticism that the Russian MOD is going to be able to replicate the Starlink service. One mill blogger saying the 24/7 starring is about to begin. The accelerated process of restoring something that never existed. May Vaseline help them? And then just finally on this, the Two Majors mill blogger that we've spoken of before, he heaps praise on the Russian army's signallers who are working overtime, he says, trying to plug the gap left by Starlink. He says to the signalmen, guys, we're sending you words of overwhelming support from our entire Two Major family. Now that the enemy has shut down the internet for everyone, and then he puts brackets, Elon Musk is a fascist and a bastard, close brackets, we know how much you're working in the cold. Unit command and combat command signals depend on you. We bow deeply to you, my dears. Everyone is counting on you, even if they curse you constantly. Comment for me, it's good to see the J6 scaly community are the butt of jokes in Russia too. Another universal constant there. Anyway, we'll put a link to Chris's thread in the episode notes. Now, I think that's interesting, the whole Starlink saga. Interesting as standalone news, but doubly so when taken into the context of Russia's recent clampdown this week of the Telegram messaging app. And more on that from James shortly. A couple more for me. Earlier today, the European Parliament voted to approve that €90 billion loan to Ukraine. That will secure 2/3 of the country's budgetary and military needs for the next 2 years. This is only the penultimate step in the approval process for the loan. The European Council still needs to formally sign off the agreement, but that is expected shortly, and that will allow payments to be made to Ukraine from April. You'll remember of the 90, 30 billion euros is just for general budgetary support and 60 billion for military stuff. Now, Ukraine's Finance Minister Serhiy Marchenko said the loan will help Ukraine strengthen its defence capabilities, ensure the uninterrupted operation of public services, and contribute to the country's resilience and closer integration with Europe's defence industrial base. Now, as we've reported before, one of the key aims of this loan is to better integrate the defence industrial bases of Ukraine and the EU. There was no mention in the report today of whether Britain is going to be able to take part in the scheme. You'll remember the idea is for Britain to pay a fee, which is thought to be some measure of the interest that the loan is going to accrue. There's been reports that could be about 2 billion euros. But Britain will pay a fee to join the scheme and thereby allow British defence companies to bid for contracts from Ukraine, paid for by this loan. And just a reminder, this loan, this is different from the SAFE scheme, the Security Action for Europe scheme, that 150 billion pot of money. That is different from this 90 billion euro scheme. But interesting to see that it's gone through, and I will be very keen to keep an eye on the price tag put on Britain's entry. Now, just finally for me, Russia is increasing production of tank and artillery barrels despite sanctions, a new report says. In an article titled Behind the Guns, Western Tools, Russian Firepower, a Ukrainian open-source intelligence outlet, Front Intelligence Insight, working with a data analytics company called Dallas, say they've obtained Russian procurement documents relating to a manufacturing plant called interestingly enough, imaginatively, manufacturing plant number 9, located in the Uralmash industrial zone of Yekaterinburg. That's about 1,000 k's east of Moscow. It's a key manufacturer of artillery barrels for the 152mm self-propelled howitzers Kolitsia and MSTA, and also barrels for tanks, the T-90 and the T-14 Armata, although you can ignore the last one because no one's ever seen a T-14 Armata, certainly not in Ukraine, and the modernised T-62 and 72 tanks. Now, the report says that despite international sanctions imposed by the EU, the United States, Ukraine, Japan and Switzerland, the plant has been undergoing continuous modernisation since at least 2016. They concluded that Russia has been expanding production facilities and modernising equipment at the site, a process that would be impossible, they say, without access to Western-originated machinery and technology. They say nearly all critical elements of production and reconstruction rely on modern, high-precision industrial equipment sourced almost exclusively from Europe and Taiwan. They then go on to list equipment broken down by the nature of the equipment, the country of origin, the manufacturer, and they highlight equipments coming from Taiwan, Italy, Germany and Britain. So at this point, the good little journalist in me sat up and I thought, I'll give the British company a ring. So they say the British company is called Jones and Shipman. They say the equipment, and I had to Google this as well, it's a surface grinding machine ProGrind 1045 Easy, which I'm told by the company just grinds metal, and that was good enough for me. Anyway, doing some of that boring due diligence, which some people call journalism, that the mainstream media get so hung up about, as I say, I gave the company a bell. Turns out that Jones and Shipman ceased trading in 2020. They've been bought out. They did used to sell equipment to Russia, but stopped manufacturing that item, the ProGrind Easy, around 2018, if not before. So the company that now owns Jones & Shipman no longer carry on trade with Russia, and they said that whilst this equipment may exist, it's no longer going to be supported with spares. So therefore, I'm not trying to pour cold water on this whole article because I haven't checked out every company from Taiwan, Italy, Germany and elsewhere. I just venture to say that it's not correct to point out that each and every piece of equipment in the report that Russia is using at this plant has broken sanctions regulations. So it might not be the scoop it appears at first. I apologise if you want to do a hot take and be instantly outraged, but I'm afraid that's the pesky mainstream media for you doing some journalism. Anyway, the report concludes, despite a decade-long import substitution strategy, Russia has not achieved independence from foreign machinery imports. Nearly all critical stages of manufacturing at plant number 9, not just auxiliary processes, still rely on high-precision industrial equipment from Europe and East Asia. The purchase and export of such large machinery is inherently easier to monitor and control than smaller appliances, which are more difficult to track and enforce, particularly on secondary markets. We'll put the link in the episode notes. Go and have a look. Go and see what a ProGrind Easy is, but just be very careful Googling that term. Now then, Adélie, diplomatic front. A lot of talk that's been flick-flacking through the morning on future elections, no future elections. There's going to be a referendum. No, there isn't. Donald Trump, May, President Zelensky. What on earth's going on?
What on earth indeed, because it has been a very confusing morning, and the picture that is emerging about possible future elections in Ukraine has kept on changing for the last few hours. So let's unpack it. In a report earlier this morning, the Financial Times wrote that Ukraine had started planning for presidential elections, alongside a referendum on any peace deal with Russia, and that Zelensky was going to make an announcement on the anniversary on February 24th, so in 2 weeks' time. The Financial Times described the move as a result of the ongoing pressure that the White House is putting on Kyiv to come to an agreement with Russia before the end of spring, as the Americans are keen to wrap up, in quotes, the conflict in order to focus on the upcoming midterms in the autumn. Now, at the time of publication, President Zelensky's office had not responded to the FT's request for comment, but a source told the Kyiv Independent that Zelensky wasn't planning to make such an announcement on February 24th. Here's the quote: "When there's no security, there's nothing else. If Russians are killing people every day, how can we announce or seriously consider elections in the coming weeks? No one is against elections, but there must be security." Now, the Ukrainian public opinion remains divided on this. There's about 55% of Ukrainians who support holding a referendum on a potential peace deal. 32% of them oppose the idea. That's according to a poll by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, which was published last month. Now, let's remind ourselves of the context here and what's at stake when it comes to presidential elections in Ukraine. The last presidential elections were held in 2019. That's when Zelensky came to power. And they were scheduled to be held again in March 2024. But as we've covered on this podcast before, as long as martial law continues, the constitution does not allow for presidential elections to take place. Zelensky has been steadfast on this point for the last 4 years, stressing that holding elections would be a major security risk for citizens across the country, let alone in the occupied territories, where obviously you can't hold elections, and therefore is any election in Ukraine viable without roughly 20% of its territories being able to vote. Putin, on the other hand, has repeatedly said that he considered Zelensky, quote, illegitimate, and he has used this excuse to refuse to engage in peace talks, a line which surely has made its way to the White House. You may remember comments a year ago when Trump called Zelensky, I quote, a dictator with, again, quote, very low approval ratings, which was untrue. At the time, Zelensky had almost 60% approval. But this time last year, as you will all remember, relationships with the White House were at an all-time low. But this, again, highlights that there is a new front in the war, the ongoing battle between Ukraine and Russia for Trump's ear. On the diplomatic front, throughout the first year of Trump's presidency, Ukraine is also waging a war of influence. But let's go back to potential presidential elections in Ukraine. At the end of last year, in December 2025, a poll from the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology showed that 60% of Ukrainians currently trust Zelensky, while 35% did not, which is still very high approval ratings 4 years into the war and way more than most Western leaders can boast. Meanwhile, the same survey showed that only 25% of Ukrainians believe Zelensky should remain in office at the end of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. But if history is any indication, we can all remember what happened to Churchill. A trusted wartime leader is not necessarily the face people want to launch the country into a new era. Only time will tell, and we'll keep an eye on this.
It is an interesting one. I look at this stuff and I don't mean to doubt the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology and their methodology, but just doing telephone polling must be blooming hard in the midst of a war with energy shortages and electricity cutouts every now and again. Numbers are great, and of course the more they do, the more over time it builds up and you get a body of evidence upon which you can base an analysis. But I just think there's got to be a health warning. I'd be interested to know what the sample size was of these surveys, when they were taken, where they were across the country. It's a big country, as we well know, and with all the electricity issues there have been in the last few weeks because of the attacks on energy infrastructure, it must be very tricky getting accurate data, polling data like that. I wonder if it's better than just speaking to the local politicians and getting their gut feeling. As a politician is supposed to be plugged into society, you're supposed to be able to channel the mood of the locality. So I wonder if that's any more accurate than trying to do. I don't know what the methodology was here, but anyway, I have a bit of a healthy skepticism, I think, with any polling data, but especially when you're in the middle of a war and in the grip of winter. But yeah, as you say, we'll continue to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I think it's a fair skepticism, because polling, as we've seen in previous elections in other countries, is often wrong, doesn't necessarily show the correct picture. As you say, the energy crisis is another level of difficulty. But you know what? Maybe we should talk to the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology about how they conduct research in wartime. And if you are listening from there, please give us a ring. Or not a ring, an email, because
the electricity might be down. Now, elsewhere on the political front, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko is in a bit of hot water, isn't he?
Yeah, it's a turbulent time for him. And it's interesting you mentioned an alternative to polling would be talking to mayors who technically should be plugged into their residents and the population, because it doesn't seem like that's what's happening in Kyiv at the moment. Because there is a whole bunch of civil society activists who are demanding that the Kyiv mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, give a press conference to discuss the ongoing energy crisis and how it's affecting the capital. So 17 organizations have written an open letter as several neighborhoods, as we've reported continuously on this podcast, continue to lack power and heating in the coldest winter since the beginning of the invasion. Here is a quote from the open letter. Kyiv today is in a state of multi-dimensional crisis, managerial, infrastructural, and communicational. The full-scale war, regular strikes on energy infrastructure, economic problems and rising social tension only exacerbate the city's systemic issues. Now, Vitaly Klitschko has been mayor of Kyiv since 2014, so over 10 years, and his last press conference took place, do you want to take a guess when, Dom? Please do not read my script. Take a guess.
2018, 8 years ago?
Well, you're almost there. 2019, 7 years ago.
Oh, what out?
So I thought you could give me an answer like something.
You told me I wasn't
more
allowed to read your
recent.
notes.
I thought you would take a guess that was more recent. Because it seems bonkers to not give a press conference for 7 years as the mayor of a capital city. I don't know. I find that really baffling. But anyway, Vitaly Klitschko, won't he give a press conference? Certainly, he does not seem very plugged in to his own population if they're asking for it. We'll have to see. Moving on, but continuing on the energy crisis, Ukraine is moving its power grid underground to shield it from Russian attacks. So far, one substation has currently been moved to an underground bunker and another one is underway. That's according to the CEO of Ukrainago, which is, I think, the state's leading energy company. But doing this, it is a really good idea to shield the power grid from Russian attacks, but doing it at a systematic level would take years and millions of dollars, and the project would require external financing and restructuring of the company's debt. Now, the CEO of Ukrainago added that the company will seek financing from the European Investment Bank, which previously provided $100 million for anti-drone protection. That was 2 years ago in 2024. Since 2023, Ukrainago has been building fortifications around its energy facilities, spending about $300 million to cover over half of its transformers with concrete shields. The other half should be completed by the summer. I'd be really curious to have a more precise idea of how many of these have been hit in the recent energy strikes and whether that's been an effective protection of the energy grid. And finally, we reported yesterday on the controversy surrounding Ukrainian skeleton racer Vladislav Hereskevich and his helmet of memory. Well, he's vowed to defy the International Olympic Committee's ban and to continue wearing it later this week. You'll remember that the 27-year-old has used a helmet featuring athletes killed during the war with Russia during his training runs in Italy. His compatriot, Olena Smaha, displayed the words "Remembrance is not a violation" on her glove while finishing 20th in the luge yesterday. The IOC is facing a growing backlash. Our colleague, Jeremy Wilson, chief sports reporter, says that the Ukrainian team have appealed the helmet ban, arguing that it is not a breach of Article 50 of the Olympic Charter, which prohibits political statements in competition. After finishing second in his training run behind British skeleton racer Matt Weston, Hereskevich insisted he would wear his banned helmet in the first qualifying race on Thursday. He said, "I used it in all the trainings. I used it today, I will use it tomorrow, and I will use it on race day. I truly believe that we didn't violate any law or any rules." The helmet has the photographs of around 20 Ukrainian athletes who have been killed since Russia's full-scale invasion, including Alina Peregudova, a 14-year-old weightlifting prospect who was killed alongside her mother by Russian shelling in Mariupol in 2022. And as Francis said yesterday, Hereskevich has the support of President Zelenskyy, who has also accused the International Olympics Committee of betraying those dead Ukrainian athletes. More on that in the show notes. And that's it for me, Dom.
Yeah, thanks, Adélie. I'm going to talk about this a little bit in my final thoughts. It's worth noting that Mr. Hereskevich is next racing, still in the qualifying stages, but next racing at 9:30 a.m. local tomorrow, Thursday morning, 9:30 in the morning, Italy time. Now, the IOC have said that they're going to kick him out if he wears the helmet of memory again. He's vowed that he will do. But if they go through with that threat, if he wears it and if they do kick him out, it will probably be the biggest story of these Olympics. An extraordinary pickle that the IOC has got themselves in, I think. Anyway, Jeremy Wilson, our chief sports reporter, who's on the ground in Italy. I've spoken to him. He's going to be coming on tomorrow to tell us what happens. 9:30 is the time of the race, so we will know by then. By the time we record tomorrow's podcast, we will know whether or not the IOC has kicked out Mr. Hereskevich. Anyway, now, delighted to, once again, turn to our colleague James Kilner, Russia watcher. James, welcome back to the pod. Always delighted to hear you. A lot going on, but let's start in the South Caucasus, because J.D. Vance, Vice President, has been there on a rare visit, I believe. I think it's First time he's been to Armenia. Is he also going to Azerbaijan? I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, what's JD Vance up to, and what's the significance of his visit? Welcome back, James.
Hi, Dom. Adélie, hi. That's right. For me, this is probably the top story of the week. This is JD Vance has been sent down by Trump as a thank you to Armenia and Azerbaijan. Trump presided over the peace deal between the two neighbours last summer, ending a couple of generations of war, and he's made a lot of play out of this. This is the cornerstone of his Nobel Peace operation. Anyway, he sent Vance down as a thank you. You're absolutely right. This is the first time a US vice president has visited Armenia. It's actually the second time a US vice president has been to Azerbaijan. The previous visit was by Dick Cheney all the way back in 2008. And that was in the context of the war in Afghanistan. Azerbaijan was used as a launch point for supplies, Western supplies into Afghanistan at that point. That's the context. Obviously very rare for such a high-level visit. There have in the South Caucasus, there has been more attention on Georgia by the US previously. We know George W. Bush was obviously there as president of the US in 2005, and they've had a couple of VP visits since. But for Armenia, this is absolutely massive. It's very hard to overstate the importance of this visit, Dom, to Armenia and to Azerbaijan as well. Both countries have fallen out of the Kremlin. So this is the US very much posturing right inside Russia's traditional sphere of influence. Obviously, both countries are ex-former Soviet states. Putin would have relied on both countries to support his war in Ukraine during the initial invasion, but both countries have subsequently, since his February 22 invasion of Ukraine, fallen out with the Kremlin. Armenia accused the Kremlin of failing to protect it in 2023 around Azerbaijan attacks linked to their fight over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Russia actually has a very large military base in Armenia, and the Armenians were terribly upset that despite various security guarantees, Russia failed to step in and defend it. More recently, Azerbaijan has fallen out with Russia because air defense systems around Grozny, Christmas Day 2024, shot down an Azerbaijani airliner, passenger airliner, and really mishandled that, failed to apologize properly, and bilateral relations collapsed. Now, Azerbaijan particularly has an outsized importance for Russian trade interests. It sits right at a crucial juncture on a north-south trade link that the Kremlin has developed to get around Western sanctions. So this trade link goes to India, and Azerbaijan sits in the middle of it. And he got the prospect of the US just walking all over and making bilateral deals with Azerbaijan. President Ilham Aliyev hosted Vance personally, signing various bilateral deals, etc. In Armenia, so that happened yesterday in Azerbaijan. The day before in Armenia, on Monday, Vance signed what appears to be, it's in tranches, so we're not 100% sure, but it's a $9 billion investment into Armenian nuclear power. The sub-importance of this is that about a third to 40% of Armenia's nuclear power is generated by Soviet-built nuclear power station that Rosatom, that's the Russian nuclear power agency, services. Not only is the US posturing in Armenia and really dragging Armenia into its sphere of influence away from Moscow, it's also undermining Russian energy strategies in the region. Rosatom is often used as a sort of Trojan horse by the Kremlin to bind energy generation in its near abroad in with more political aims as well. So we can see here, it's a very good example, the biggest example for some time of the West really trying to grab Azerbaijan and Armenia away from Russia. It's really interesting.
Now, earlier on I talked about the collective meltdown, this psychological meltdown that's happening in Russia over Starlink, and I mentioned that it comes in the week, probably not connected, but it's all in the same pool as the Kremlin clamping down on Telegram, trying to get everyone to move over onto Max. What's going on there? I thought they liked Telegram. I thought they did most of their stuff on Telegram. Surely it's a bit of a backward step, isn't it, to suddenly deny Telegram as a means of communication?
Yes, indeed. I think this is a very important story as well. Telegram, as we know, is the absolute foremost and most heavily used social messaging app in the Russian language, especially by Russians. And in the last couple of days, social media on Telegram and some Western channels, if Russians have VPNs, etc., have been full of complaints about how slow Telegram's gotten. It's basically almost unusable, and there's been outrage here. And the irony is they've been saying, oh, we want the free internet, etc. Obviously in Russia, it's far from that. This seems like a huge effort by the Kremlin, by its state telegram regulator or censor, Roskomnadzor, to finally push Russians over to, like you say, the Max app that they developed last summer and away from Telegram. The Kremlin has accused Telegram of being used for fraud, being used by criminals, being used by terrorist groups, this sort of tropey type stuff we've seen before. And it said it wants to close it down effectively. And it's slowed down to an unusable degree. Pavel Dudov, he's the founder of Telegram. He's a Russian guy. He lives in Dubai, although he's actually stuck in France at the moment where they're investigating him for similar sort of potential crimes. He released a statement accusing the Kremlin of acting, or Russia acting similar to Iran, saying Russia is restricting access to Telegram in an attempt to force its citizens to switch to a state-controlled app, that's Max, designed for surveillance and political censorship. So he's not holding back. The implications for the slowdown in Telegram are much wider than just socialites in Moscow complaining about the price of foreign handbags or Instagramming or taking photos of their lunches, etc. There's actually very serious implications along the front line where Russian units really rely very heavily on Telegram to coordinate their attacks and supply routes, etc. And this has caused a lot of consternation. And you can see all this playing out on the mill bloggers. We've spoken about mill bloggers a lot on the podcast, and they're very vocal. And they've been absolutely outraged. They're like, you can see them almost losing their mind and all this bile and venom pouring onto their keyboard as they try and fight back. Picked out a couple of quotes for you. There's a mill blogger called Archangel Spetsnaz. He said thousands of military personnel will be left without communication, which, given the ongoing offensive, will lead to fatal consequences. And he also said there's no workable alternative to Telegram along the front line. Again, we've spoken about this at some length. Russian signals and communication systems have been very poor on the front line, and they really have relied on these sort of unofficial systems like Telegram, which is very robust and has strong security apparatus in it. Another mill blogger said that the command and capability function of frontline troops, Russian frontline troops, will fail without Telegram. So there's hyperbole built into some of these comments, but I think we can definitely assume that if Telegram continues to be undermined, and this has been going for a couple of days now, and the Kremlin does seem determined to push people over to Max, that we're going to see some capability drag on the front line. So again, really, all this the dysfunctionality we see in Russia and the way things happen and the discoordination we can see emanating out of Moscow and impacting the front line.
It is amazing. It seems so reliant. The Russian military that claims to be the second best in the world, or whatever they're trying to claim. They're brought down by Starlink, an American company, deciding not to give them the signal, and then Telegram, a phone messaging app. That seems to be it. So, I don't think NATO's got too much to worry about just yet. Now, I'd like to turn to you for all my vegetable news, James. We've done potatoes a few months ago. What's the latest that you can tell me on cucumbers in Russia?
Yeah, that's right. This story seems to come round and round again with different vegetables, Dom, with different items of food anyway. Cucumbers are the latest. It's apparently spiraling costs. We've had eggs, we've had potatoes, we've had bread, etc. Now it's cucumbers. Data, and again, this is causing a lot of consternation in Russia with these fashionistas saying that cucumbers have become so expensive now, they're going to have to give them up a lot, along with facial they've had to give up as well. But anyway, cucumbers now are apparently doubled in price since November, 300 rubles a kilo, so it's about £3 for a kilo. And that's in the major cities. In the regions, in the depth of winter, these cucumbers are double that again, or even triple. And I've seen reports online that they're now roughly the same price as meat. So cucumbers spiraling. This is a semi-seasonal problem for Russians. Obviously, they've had a very cold and very snowy winter, which has made transport a lot harder, a lot more expensive, and crops, etc., are down. But there's also sanctions and impacts here. So it's just another example of how the Russian economy is just pinging around, very volatile, very difficult for anyone to predict.
I wish it led to some rebellion or riots or revolution, and then we could call it the cucumber revolution. I think that would be really nice in history books. Yeah, maybe it will. It's not over yet. These arguments are going to go on, and like cucumbers, I don't know, like cucumbers.
Now, James, before we go to final thoughts, you've got a few other sort of quick roundups of diplomatic pointers that we should be making note of. What have you got for us?
Yeah, I'll come to these in a minute, but on the point about revolution disquiet in Russia, I do think the Telegram issue that we've just been talking about is really important to monitor. The level of annoyance among ordinary Russians is very high. With these food price increases, I think there's a general acceptance that this is going to happen and then come off, and people will switch from one food to the other. So I think they're less impactful. But the Telegram, which is the single most important communication channel for ordinary Russians, not only is it communication, it's also news, and it's relatively unfiltered, is a real shock system. So I think if you're looking for angry Russians, that's definitely where to look rather than the food and economic side of things. Sticking with the economy, Dom, a really nice stat I've seen today is that the proportion of Russia's GDP now linked to trade with the outside world is at its lowest since the USSR. So, to misquote Churchill, the lowest since there was a sort of a rather frayed iron curtain sort of hanging across Europe. Russia's proportion of GDP linked to outside trade with the outside world is now below 18%, which is its lowest since the 1990s. By comparison, it was roughly about 40% in the early 2000s. So again, the impact of sanctions is very obvious there. One last quick point on the diplomatic side of things. It's just really Lavrov. He's the Russian foreign minister. He held a press briefing earlier today, basically reiterating Russia's, or the Kremlin's, maximalist approach to the peace talks. What I mean by that is they don't seem to be backing down in any way whatsoever on their various demands to take over the whole of the Donbass. So no shifts there at all, Dom.
Yeah, I saw it, as in I literally saw it on the sort of news channels and what have you, but I didn't bother reading it. And this is a bit, probably not the best thing for a journalist to admit, but I just don't really bother reading stuff from Lavrov now. I know what he's going to say. I know it's not going to be new. I know it's going to be the old tropes and the narrative and what have you. So I just don't bother reading his stuff anymore. Same with Medvedev. I read it because it's funny. I read it because we like making jokes about the occasionally sober Dmitry Medvedev. I don't actually read it to oh my goodness, what's happened? What's the latest? What's going on? What kite is the Kremlin flying today? It's just irrelevant. And, okay, I'm not totally there yet, but I'm not far away with Donald Trump either. Just ignore it. I'll find out tomorrow when he's backtracked or it's flip-flopped 3 or 4 times. I'll see what the reaction is to see what actually is going to happen or potentially might happen. The stuff that Donald Trump says, I just go, yeah, all right, whatever, maybe. Who knows?
At least he's more unpredictable than Lavrov and Medvedev. Because he keeps on changing his mind and coming out with...
Yeah, but in a way that is predictable.
No, that is predictable. But you don't know which new outrageous take he's going to have.
Yeah. Which is why I don't bother paying too much attention to it the first time I see it, because I know it'll be probably revised within a few minutes, hours, a couple of days, whatever, 2 weeks. Anyway, let's go to final thoughts. Now, I will go first. And I want to go back to the Winter Olympics and the International Olympic Committee's decision about the helmet of memory. And I want to talk about how things are commemorated and the political decisions that are being made around here. Yesterday, the funny story was Norwegian biathlete Sturla Holm Lægreid, who won a bronze in, God, what was it? When you walk for miles and then shoot a couple of things. Can't remember what that's called. Anyway, he won bronze. His compatriot, Johan Olaf Bolten, got gold. And he dedicated his gold medal to their late teammate, Sivert Gutenbakken, who died in December last year. So you've got someone there commemorating a friend of theirs that had died. You also had yesterday US figure skater Maxim Naumov, who held a picture of his parents tragically killed last year, I think in a plane crash. Really, loads of people killed on the way to a skating event, I think. But anyway, Mr. Naumov had a photograph of his parents. He dedicated his performance to his parents. So, a couple of things here. First, this whole spat with the IOC, it's not a question of commemorating people who have died. That doesn't seem to be the thing that the IOC have got upset about. The IOC is saying to competitors that it is the manner of their deaths which dictates whether or not you're allowed to commemorate them, which is crazy. They're saying that Johan Olaf Bolten can dedicate his gold medal to his teammate that died, and Maxim Naumov can remember his parents, and yet you've got Vladislav Kyiv, who's not allowed to commemorate murdered, dead Ukrainian athletes. So it's the manner of which they've died that dictates, according to the IOC, whether or not they're allowed to be commemorated. Secondly, the IOC says that they don't allow political statements at the Games. Okay, fine. looking beyond the point that everything is a political statement, where I buy my lunch is a political statement, but just being sensible for a moment, in terms of actual political statements. Now, Władysław Horashkiev didn't hold aloft a banner saying, Russia, get out of Ukraine. Okay, an overtly political statement. He had pictures of dead Ukrainian athletes on his helmet, inviting us, the viewers, to make the interpretation. He didn't tell us what to think. But beyond that, anyway, the Olympics is not politics free. The Olympic Games are not politics free. The IOC has made a political decision to allow Russian and Belarusian competitors to be at the Games as individual neutral athletes. So that is a political decision. So there are political decisions all over the place. And I just think trying to say there's no politics in sport, which is what the IOC, or saying the IOC saying we're not going to allow politics in sport, is rubbish, because it's there whether they like it or not, and they have had to respond to it in the way that they have, allowing individual neutral athletes, whether you agree with that or not. So to say politics can be taken out of sport, I think is wrong. And then they're saying it's the manner of how someone died as to whether or not you're able to commemorate them or not. I just think they've got this badly wrong. And as I say, this is all going to come to a head tomorrow when Władysław Horashkiev is next racing, 9:30 local time tomorrow, Thursday, in Italy. The IOC have said that they are going to stop him. They are going to kick him out of the Olympics if he wears the helmet with the picture of the 20 fallen Ukrainian athletes again. If they go through with that, I think that's going to be absolutely enormous. We will know by the time of the pod tomorrow, and we're going to have our colleague Jeremy Wilson, who's going to come on the pod tomorrow and tell us what happens and what the implications are. So I just think the IOC have got this absolutely around the wrong way, and tomorrow is going to be a big day for sport and politics. Now then, Adélie, what's your final thoughts?
Thanks, Dom. So my final thought today, I want to zoom in on an article published by the Kyiv Independent on the Epstein files and Belarus. Because there's one Belarusian woman who appears repeatedly in the Epstein files. Her name is Karina Shulyak. She's 36 years old, and she's the last person Epstein talked to outside prison before committing suicide. Allegedly. In the latest batch of files, she's mentioned 40,000 times. Belarus and Minsk have mentions around 1,000, 1,500. So what is her link to Epstein, as we can tell from what's in this latest batch of files? For over 10 years, Epstein financed women's studies in the US in dentistry, as well as her travel arrangements for her and for her family. When she immigrated to the US, she replied to US immigration questions with Epstein's help, claiming to oppose Belarus's dictatorial regime. The Daily Mail alleged that Shulyak was also involved in a sham marriage with Epstein's associate Jennifer Kalin, a US citizen, to ensure she could remain in the United States. And she was also the main recipient of Epstein's last will, which was signed 2 days before his death, where she inherits the vast majority of his estate. So what is that, you ask? Because I wondered as well. What did she inherit from Epstein? $50 million to start with, properties on Epstein's Little and Great St. James Islands, the Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, his townhouse in New York, an apartment in central Paris, and 48 loose diamonds, alongside a near 33-carat diamond ring given to her, quote, in contemplation of marriage. That is very interesting indeed. I will link to the article in the show notes.
And we must say, just being in the Epstein files is in no way an indication of wrongdoing.
Indeed not.
James, what have you got for us in final thoughts?
Dom, I have to disagree with you slightly over Lavrov.
Go on then.
I think he does come up with some interesting tidbits occasionally. And he came up with a bit of a gold, thanks to the challenge, he came up with some sort of nugget. I thought it was interesting today when he was talking about, he basically was urging Russians to, in his words, basically do the right thing and holiday in North Korea. North Korea has become a very staunch Russia ally. They put in a lot of money building resorts on their Riviera, specifically for Russian visitors, but the numbers haven't been there. Apparently 6,500 Russians holidayed in North Korea in 2024, and this number rose to only 10,000 last year, despite huge political pressure and advertising campaigns, etc., reopening direct air links between Moscow and between Russia and North Korea, Moscow and Pyongyang, and train links, etc. To put it into the context, Kim, the leader of North Korea, opened up a brand new resort for Russia on the east coast of the Korean peninsula, capable of holding 20,000 Russian tourists a day. So 10,000 in a year is an absolute drop. Just an interesting little story there from listening to Lavrov.
Isn't North Korea on the same latitude as northern Canada? I'm trying to work out where the North Korean Riviera is.
I've not been there, but they developed like it was a bit long. It's 4-kilometre stretch on the east side of North Korea, with beaches and hotels and villas and nightclubs.
Okay, I'll keep an eye out for that. Yeah, the North Korea Riviera.
Sounds like a good opportunity. If you get the chance, Dom, maybe that's a field trip.
I'd be up for it. I've got my budgies. Let's go. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Francis and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons, to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Executive producers are Francis Durnley, Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.
My name is David Nicholls. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.